Missouri doesn't need Beau Pribula to be Patrick Mahomes, but they do need him to be Jalen Hurts. I'll explain right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou Mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And speaking of hoops, got a lot of hate coming your way with why I actually hate March Madness at the moment. And as you know, you everydayers know in particular, I hate replay in basketball. But there is one notable exception to that. I'll explain later in the program. Quickly, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. So as I said there in the tease at the top of the show, I don't think Missouri needs Beau Pribula, if he is indeed the Missouri starting quarterback this fall, or whomever it is for that matter. I don't think they need him to be Patrick Mahomes. And what I mean by that, I don't think they need him to be a Heisman Trophy winner or the best quarterback in the SEC. And that's quite simply based on what Eli Drinkwitz has told us this offseason. And for all of Drinkwitz, his bluster, he likes to poke fun at opposing coaches, troll a little bit, of course putting on the Star Wars cape and the lightsaber for Dan Mullen and all that good stuff. Well, for all of that, when it comes to preseason prognostications and talking up his roster, I think Eli's been pretty even-handed so far in his 5-year run here at Missouri. So for him to be saying that this Tiger roster coming up here in 2025 is the most talented he's ever had, well, I think that's something he really believes. Whether he's right or not, I guess we'll find out here in a few months. But what that tells me is that Missouri doesn't absolutely need a superstar at quarterback, at least not this season. And here's the thing. I think in 2026, just based on experience alone, I think you'll see the best of Beau Pribula. But for this season alone, if Eli Drinkwitz is right, well, then really what Missouri needs is more of a game manager and a guy who can run the football on his own, a good athlete, a guy like the Philadelphia Eagles' Jalen Hurts, who I don't think anybody has him ranked ahead of Patrick Mahomes, who's listening to this program. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I don't know. Maybe if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan like I am and you've seen Jalen Hurts maybe play his 2 best games of his NFL career against the Chiefs in a couple Super Bowls there, at least in my opinion, it's the best I've ever seen him play. Maybe you have a different opinion. But the point here is that if this Missouri roster, especially if it's as good on the offensive line, because that's the thing about Philadelphia last year, of course. The Eagles had an elite offensive line, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs were kicking tackles out, were kicking out guards to play left tackle. A guy in Joe Tooney who had played left guard his entire career was then having to play tackle. And with, of course, the Eagles' myriad pass rushers, that was a huge problem. Speaking of myriad pass rushers, based on hype, based on my own analysis, the Missouri Tigers have a heck of a lot of those as well. So to me, if Missouri's roster is really this good, maybe we're overthinking the Pribula and quarterback part of this a little bit. Of course, it's an important piece. If you have Chase Daniel, if you have Joe Burrow in 2019, whatever your Cam Newton in 2010, whatever your highest level of quarterback play you can think of is, obviously Missouri's ceiling is going to be tremendously higher if they get to that. But what I'm telling you is, if the goal is for 10 wins, get to a college football playoff here, well, Pribula doesn't have to be a top 5 quarterback even in the SEC, in my opinion. He's just got to be good. He doesn't have to be great. He doesn't have to be elite, but obviously he's got to be good, and I think he's got that in him based on the little that I've seen from him play. So hopefully this Missouri roster, once again, will take a tremendous amount of pressure off of their first-year starter, whether it is indeed Pribula or Sam Horn. And one thing I've talked a bit about this offseason is I think Missouri has a chance to be a relatively run-heavy outfit this season. I think part of the interesting thing about that, in my opinion, adding Gavin Hoffman from Iowa, the tight end, along with Brett Norfleet, I think gives Missouri some interesting potential looks. For example, one thing I would like Missouri to do, say they break the huddle in a 12 personnel with one running back, two tight ends, and two wide receivers. Well, typically, especially with Eli Drinkwitz, you got a couple tight ends out there. That's a pretty run-heavy look for Missouri traditionally. But what if, when you break the huddle, you split those two tight ends, actually not as tight ends and not as slot receivers either, but actually wide receivers. Line the two tight ends, Hoffman and Norfleet, out on the boundary. And here's why I want to do that. Well, there's a few reasons, in fact. Number one, a lot of college defenses, their corners are not necessarily going to follow the team's best receivers into the slot or even switch sides of the field for that matter. So now you've got an interesting matchup in a couple different ways, especially in the running game on the outside. Hey, guess who likes to run the ball outside with an outside zone? The Missouri Tigers. Now all of a sudden on the outside of the play, I've got a 240-pound tight end blocking a 180-pound cornerback. That's going to spring possibly some big plays in the running game. But back to what I said earlier, the defense is thinking that is a run look. But you split those tight ends out wide, suddenly they've got matchup problems because one where either they're going to have to move their corners out of position inside. This is something I would do against that type of defense, by the way, that has corners that are basically your outside boundary corners are fixed in the same place, much like Missouri has done the last few years, by the way. But now, if you've got Kevin Coleman and, say, Marquise Speedy Johnson in the slot, if you simply just run Speedy on a 9 route straight down the middle of the field, that is causing a lot of stress on a defense, first of all. And again, Kevin Coleman, a guy who's shown he's a very productive slot receiver in the SEC for Mississippi State already. What are you going to put, a safety or a linebacker or one of those type of guys on him? That doesn't seem to be a recipe for success. Again, I just think it would be interesting to put that look out there in certain situations and see how the defense adjusts, see what your advantage is, because I see a lot of potential advantages there. And that's why I thought adding somebody like Gavin Hoffman makes the Missouri offense so much more potentially versatile in 2025. And coming up, why my love-hate relationship with the NCAA tournament, especially as a Missouri fan, has really drifted mostly toward hate at this point. And I do hate to say that, but you know what? Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Because anytime you're ordering out, online shopping, movies these days, it's easy to lose track of all that stuff. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. And it's not just a budgeting app. We're talking a complete financial command center, tracking all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So if you've got a bunch of LLCs, whatever it might be, I'm telling you, that stuff gets a little bit complicated. So just having it in one place is really a game changer to me. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. So, of course, a huge part of me loves March Madness in the NCAA tournament. Filling out the brackets, of course, when Missouri is in it, that's always a blast, all of that good stuff. The upsets, everything. It's all fun for the most part. But damn, why does the Drake game have to overshadow the two of the best experiences I've ever had at Mizzou Arena, which was the Kansas game this past season and the Alabama game as well? I just don't think that's fair or even rational or sane whatsoever. And also, frankly, as a Missouri fan, after yet another loss to a double-digit seed, how much more am I supposed to take at this point in the 30th anniversary of the Tyus Edney game? But for real, I do think that is a slight problem with college basketball right now. As great as the NCAA tournament is, it does seem to overshadow almost everything else in the sport. The regular season is, I don't know. I'm basing this. It's not meaningless to me. I'm basing this on the temperature of the room, I guess, around Columbia, around this Missouri basketball team. And it was just night and day, frankly, between now and, again, February after the Alabama game. It just felt like everybody in the town was buzzing about Missouri basketball, and then just all of the air was let out of the balloon, or maybe a knife was put through the balloon, more accurately, with that Drake game. Just a brutal loss for the Tigers, a bad day for Dennis Gates, quite frankly. But that doesn't overshadow, to me, everything he did for the entire season, which can only be looked at as a positive. For the most part, was everything positive? Obviously, the Missouri's defense down the stretch regressed back to what it had been really for the first couple years, more or less, under Dennis Gates. So that's something to look at for sure. But the idea that just, the season was somehow a disappointment now, that's the thing that makes me dislike March Madness, and how, just one game, even if you win the first game but then lose the second game that you're supposed to win, as Missouri did in 2023, then it still feels like a disappointment to some people. I just don't know that that's rational, sane, or certainly even fair, but, I guess that's life, isn't it? And despite some pleads to the contrary from some Missouri fans, Dennis Gates is not done with high school recruiting. Apparently, J.J. Andrews, a top 50 player per 24/7 Sports, is going to be deciding likely between Missouri and Arkansas, his home state, Arkansas, that is, the Little Rock product, the 6'6" forward. Sounds like a pretty good prospect, somebody who really fits the Missouri Dennis Gates mold offensively, to be certain, and looks like a switchable type of defender as well. But again, this Thursday at 4 p.m., we will find out about J.J. Andrews, at least for now. We're still a long ways away from high school signing day as well. And 2026, another top 50 recruit here, Aiden Chronister, has also an unofficial visit with the Tigers all the way in September 20th. So going to be a minute into football season there. So again, just shows you we're pretty early here in high school recruiting for the next process. And speaking of high school recruiting, as you know, Jackson Cantwell is going to be deciding on some teams not named the Missouri Tigers. The Tigers didn't make his final four. And according to On3, they're reporting that the University of Miami has the most lucrative offer of NIL on the deal for the five-star recruit in Cantwell, sitting right about at the $2 million mark. Now, I don't know if that's per year total. I assume that's annual value. I don't know if that's for 1 year. What are we talking, 4 years, $8 million? Regardless, the point here is I did bring up that Miami, Oregon, Missouri, who didn't make the cut there, I brought up that, hey, these are some NIL schools, people. These are some schools that are Missouri swimming in some real deep waters here. Whether or not that is the number one factor in Cantwell's choice, you'll just have to ask him that yourself. That'll be up to him to decide, of course. But I had some people clutch their pearls at the idea that, maybe some money might actually be a factor here. Yeah, let's pay attention to football in 2025, guys. Even for big-time high school recruits, we're talking millions of dollars here, and Cantwell is absolutely that level of recruit. So just wanted to point that out, and also wanted to point another thing out here, which is that I was hearing some talk about Speedy Johnson for this upcoming season. Actually, this is from Gerard Hamilton over at Power Mizzou, he was saying, this is actually a few weeks ago here in my notes, but he was talking about Marquez Speedy Johnson as well, mentioning that not only is he expected to be one of the team's 3 starting wide receivers, he's expected to be one of the team's 2 kick returners as well. And I don't know if this is exactly the point that Gerard was getting at here, but it did just make me think that, a lot of Missouri fans would go, oh, maybe you should take Johnson off of kick return duties since he's going to be a starting receiver this year. Well, I would just say that kick returner actually in 2025 is the most utterly unimportant position on the field, and I'm not exaggerating whatsoever. I mean, really, long snapper, much bigger effect on a game than a Missouri team that's probably going to have single-digit kickoff returns in 2025. I think they had 8 or something like that last season. So it's touchbacks galore. You basically have to wave your arms like this 9 out of 10 times, side to side, saying, hey, shake it off. Nope, we don't want it. That's the skill that is required as a kick returner. Unfortunately, one of the most exciting plays in football is the most utterly boring play in college football these days. And certainly the place kicker is a more important position than kick returner in this point. And Harrison Mevis, the former Missouri place kicker, 12 of 13 in field goals in the UFL this season, by the way, after not making the NFL in 2024. His one miss, by the way, was from 60-plus yards at the end of the first half and was returned for a long touchdown, by the way. So maybe Mevis needs to be a little bit better in missed kick return coverage. That's obvious sarcasm there, folks, but not sure what to make of any of his kickoff return numbers, by the way, because much like the NFL, well, they don't have a college football-like touchback system anymore. So, again, it's hard to really know what to make of his kickoff acumen, in my opinion, unless you're actually watching said kicks or those games. So, Mevis, though, pretty impressive at the pro level so far as just a straight-up field goal kicker. And as I said many months ago, I actually think the new way that the NFL handles the kickoff rule, and there could very well be some more tweaking to that rule this offseason, I think that helps Mevis because he was never going to be a huge touchback guy in the NFL. So if that's not a skill that is necessary and it's really more about your field goal kicking acumen, that should be a plus for Mevis, and I wouldn't write him off just yet. And as you everydayers know, I hate instant replay in basketball and think it should be abolished, except for one notable exception, and I'll get to that right after this. So my whole thing with instant replay in basketball is even if it makes the calls 5, 10, 15, 20%, heck, even 50% more accurate, I just don't think it's worth it because it slows the game down so much to the point where it's boring. I know a lot of people agree with me on this particular topic, but whether you do or not, there is an exception to this rule, I would say, and I realized it last night watching the Cavs and the Pacers in the NBA. You may have seen the altercation between the Pacers, Benedict Mathurin, and the Cavs, DeAndre Hunter, and at one point, at first glance, it sure seemed like, well, Mathurin just kind of stood there with his arms out, and wow, DeAndre Hunter really violently pushed him in the chest there. Sure seems like Hunter might be getting thrown out of the game. That's what it looked like initially, until you saw the replay, and until you saw the officials, well, they figured it out. They saw that, in fact, it was Mathurin who took kind of a little jab to DeAndre Hunter's chest, which is what Hunter reacted to. So that was, and then, of course, Mathurin, the guy who threw the little jab, was tossed out of the game. So that was the correct move. And I got to say, in those types of situations, in fights, in altercations, and stuff like that, I think it makes all the sense in the world for there to be instant replay It's because, number one, if you're going to be throwing guys out of the game, I mean, that is truly that important. We should actually stop and take a look at it. And also, realistically, 3 guys watching 10 in basketball as referees is already more difficult enough. But at least you're following a ball more often than not. Whereas in an altercation, all of a sudden, that 94 feet of length in the court, you've got coaches, you've got guys on the bench, you've got potentially, we've seen fans get involved in stuff like this before. The point is, this is not exactly what these guys are paid for, is to figure out in the moment, in the heat of the moment, who is doing the right thing in a fight or an altercation. Even if to expect them to be able to do that with so many variables involved, I don't think is realistic. So, you know what? If the ball goes out of bounds with 5 seconds left and the call was incorrect, I got to be honest, I can live with that. But I will say, replay for actual fights and altercations, that kind of thing, I think that's the one spot where I am more than okay with it. By the way, remember the name Jimmy Daugherty? Yes, the Missouri quarterback from the late 90s, the Larry Smith era. I got to be honest, I didn't realize he was such a high riser in the coaching ranks all of a sudden. This coming season, he's going to be the offensive coordinator for Jedd Fish at Washington in 2025. So a major job there, a Big Ten offensive coordinator job for Jimmy this coming season, just 46 years old. He had been Jedd Fish's quarterback coach at Washington before this. So, you know, with a big-time couple of years or so at Washington, you never know. Jimmy Daugherty could be a head coach in college football here sooner rather than later. And finally, let's go out on, I'm going to call this a lighthearted note, even though by the end of this, you're going to think, wait, he thought this was lighthearted? Stick with me. It's all going to make sense. So a few weeks ago, it probably wasn't that long ago, regardless, I made a statement that, you know what, comparing the transfer portal and the NIL, this new world of college football, to the Wild West, I think is actually the wrong analogy, because, in fact, there were some rules in the Wild West. I'm not sure what rules are happening in college football these days. Well, I had one listener who had to do the old internet, well, actually, that type of deal. And here's what that person said: extrajudicial killings were far more common in the Old West than legal executions, for example. And then he continues on with a bunch of stuff here. But just to that point, extrajudicial killings were far more common in the Old West than legal executions. Well, I asked Google's Gemini AI, hey, how many reported homicides were there in the United States versus legal executions recently? Well, in 2023, the United States had more than 19,000 reported homicide cases. 24 people were put to death by lethal injection in total. So indeed, if that's your thing about the Old West, well, there were a lot more extrajudicial killings than legal executions. Well, that certainly is the case in modern America as well. So to my point, the whole Wild West thing, that analogy has gotten a little bit cliched, I think, because frankly, there are places in the Wild West in 1812 that I would rather be than certain places in this world today. So that's the point there. The real point was that, you know what? Hey, at least there were some laws in some of those Old West places. I'm not sure what the heck is going on in the transfer portal and NIL. That was my main point, and the sports-related point there. Again, super lighthearted thing about murder and legal executions there at the end, right? Didn't that uplift your spirits at the end? Well, I sure hope so, and thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On the NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Again, Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.